Hey, awesome kids. Look, I recorded this video after I went through all this material, and I'm not going to lie to you, the video is long, but look, go through little bits and pieces of it, right? If, after about a half hour, your brain's starting to be like overloaded, take a break, eat some licorice, right? Have some hickory sticks, some beef jerky, an apple, whatever it is, and come back to it, okay? Come back to it. But I promise you this stuff is really, really important, okay? So be tough, tough it out, and, you should be able to survive sitting here listening to me for 56 minutes or whatever it was, okay? Love you guys. Anyways, we'll see ya. Hey kids, how's it going? So today we're going to be talking about principles of individualism and collectivism, and we're actually, I should adjust the title here, going to look at collectivism first, and then we'll look at individualism second, because it's a little bit more complicated. All right, so let's do a dive. Let's get into this a little bit here. All right, so the real world, ladies and gentlemen. Look, we talk about society in social studies, right? We try to figure out why what happens, what makes people do what they do, right? We look at political systems, economic systems, etc. And the reality of collectivism and individualism is that there's really no state that is one or the other, right? There's no purely collectivist state, and there's really no purely individualist state either, okay? So I'll give you an example. We quite often talk about North Korea, and we're going to look at North Korea as an example of a state that is highly collectivized. However, there are aspects of individualism creeping in to the state of North Korea. For example, they now have a free trade zone where they trade with certain countries, right, in North Korea. And free trade, that's kind of based on capitalist ideals, which is a very individualist idea. Alternatively, when we think about individualism, we talk about the United States of America, right? The United States of America is probably one of the greatest examples of individualism that we have in the world. And just because we say that the U.S. is highly individualist doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't elements of collectivism in the United States of America. For example, ladies and gentlemen, having a national military is an example of collectivism. And maybe you've heard of Medicare and Medicaid in the United States of America, right? Medicare is for people over 65, so they can have health insurance, and Medicaid is health insurance provided for people who are poor, and that's provided by the government, which of course, guys, for governments to give services, those services have to be funded by tax dollars, okay? One thing I want you to understand here in Social 30 is the idea that there's no such thing as a free service. Like here in Canada, right? I mean, we can see collectivism here too. There are elements of individualism like private ownership, but at the same time, there's elements of collectivism, such as in each province, they have their own provincially funded healthcare system. And that healthcare system exists because people pay taxes which fund the system. So there's no such thing as free services in society, or as Milton Friedman said, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's just not. It has to come from somebody, right? And we'll talk about where that comes from. So anyways, the one, I don't know, guys, there's exceptions to every rule in social studies. Like when we think of collectivism, we think of the former USSR. We think of modern day Cuba. Cuba is a communist state. We think of North Korea. We can sometimes think of nations like China, although I think you could argue that China has definitely embraced aspects of the free market, right? In the 1980s, China has embraced the free market, and as a result, we see massive economic growth. So anyways, as far as collectivist societies in the world today, I would say North Korea is probably the most collectivist. And if you've gone through the PowerPoint or this presentation, which you should have, you would have seen this image here. And this image shows us the 18 state-sanctioned haircuts that women can get in North Korea. And then there is the 10 state-sanctioned haircuts that men can have in North Korea, right? So there's the female haircuts, and then over here is the male haircuts, or are the male haircuts. And guys, I mean, when you think about a person's hairstyle, right? I look at my hair, it's looking pretty fly. So, you know, I got the sweet cut, it's kind of longer on top. You got the line up here and stuff like that, right? You know, your hair is sort of an expression of yourself, right? I don't know if you've ever walked down the street and see someone with like a mohawk on their head and stuff like that, but I mean, that is an expression of them. But in North Korea, they even control the haircuts you get. Yes, it is that controlled and collectivized. Anyways, I just thought I'd share that because I think it's it just demonstrates to you what life is like in North Korea and how much control, in fact, the government has for the supposed greater good of society. All right, so let's talk about collectivism. So I'm going to use my handy dandy drawing pen here, and then I'm going to switch between this and just a paint canvas so that we can draw and I can write stuff down as if this was a whiteboard, right? I'm going to try to make this for you guys as close to the way I would do it in a normal classroom, because it's all the extra stuff beyond the PowerPoint that's the important stuff, right? So let's talk collectivism. So it says collectivism stresses human interdependence. Interdependence is a really important idea. Sorry, I just got to select my drawing tool. So make sure you know what interdependence is, okay? For whatever reason, I'm not able to draw on this right now. I apologize for that. So look, interdependence. So what is interdependence? Interdependence means that we're all in this together. One sec. All right, so interdependence, folks, gets at the idea of the fact that we're all connected, right? That's what interdependence is talking about. It's the idea that, I'm just going to draw an arrow up here, you know, we are all connected. So I personally would write that down, right? If you printed off this PowerPoint presentation, the idea of interdependence means we're all locked together, hand in hand, working together. And then it says also it emphasizes group goals and the common good, right? Guys, this idea of group goals, what you want as an individual in a collectivist society, or if you believe in collectivism, isn't as important as what the entire group decides. And the common good, we usually juxtapose that with the idea of, you know, self-interest, right? So instead of focusing on you only, right, and pursuing your own needs and wants, then you have to put that aside in a collectivist society, or if you believe in collectivism, and you need to make sure that you're focusing on the common good, the good of everyone, not just the good of you. You know, as a dad, you know, I can't just do what I want because, you know, this is what Scott Crosby wants. I have to think about my daughters, right? I have to think about my wife, and you know, my own individual goals or my own individual wants just don't matter in this case, right? Once you're a parent and you have to stop being selfish, you'll understand that. Now, moving on, we have individualism. I'm just going to erase what we have here so far. We have individualism. And guys, when we think about individualism, right, we know it's on the right. It stresses the importance of personal autonomy. When you are autonomous, that means you can do what you want. You act in your own individual, big fancy term for you, agency, right? You act upon your own agency. You do for self, to use a little rapper term there, right? So you do for self. So it's a state of individual freedom from outside authority. And guys, when you live in a society that embraces individualism, we focus on the idea of self-reliance. So you provide for you. No one provides for you. If you want to eat, you got to do it yourself. You got to get out there. You got to make that money. You got to go to the grocery store, and you need to ensure that you're providing it for you. And look, guys, here's the reality. As a young person, right, I'm assuming some of you in this class are young, right, you're still very much dependent upon your parents. But once you reach adulthood and you move out of the little nest and you go fluttering to wherever you go out of the birdie's nest, you, at that point, guys, have to become self-reliant. And really, I mean, self-reliance comes down to being able to provide for yourself, right? All right, let's move on here. Sorry, just give me a sec. All right, so we're now, guys, going to look at each of the different principles of collectivism. If you actually had a Social 30 textbook, right, these principles are in there, and these principles, guys, make up a whole bunch of the items that you may see on your first written assignment. I'm just going to tell you guys right now, your first written assignment is going to be focused on collectivism and individualism. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you. And guys, collectivism and individualism are two of the 8 possible ideologies you're going to see on your assignment 1 for your Alberta Social 30 -2 diploma exam. If you're in -1, don't worry about this right now. You still need to know it, but you're not going to get it written about it. Okay, anyways, so principles of collectivism. So it says, the principles of collectivism are the foundations of ideologies such as communism and socialism. We should know that, right? We should know that. That should be no big surprise. I told you guys at the beginning of this class, when it comes to the spectrum, everything on the left is considered to be collectivist, right? So socialism is collectivist, communism is collectivist. To be a liberal means you believe in collectivism. To be a radical revolutionary means you believe in collectivism. And over time, guys, as I mentioned at the beginning here, most societies have evolved, even the United States, which we think of as being the most individualist society in the world. Most states have evolved to incorporate elements of collectivism in their society, right? Like, I'll give you guys an example, right? I live in the utopia of Sherwood Park, Alberta, Canada, and, you know, we pay taxes, right? Every month I get a bill from Strathcona County Transit, and I pay taxes, and I pay towards Strathcona County, not transit, but I do pay for transit actually, right? My tax dollars go to fund a public transportation system. My tax dollars go to fund a, garbage removal system, right? Every Tuesday at my house, they come and they pick up my garbage bin and they dump it and they leave it on the curb and I wheel it back onto my driveway. The taxes that I pay also pay for things like road clearing and road maintenance during the winter, right? Not sure where you're living, but we get a whole bunch of snow here. So over time, guys, as time has moved forward, we start to see collectivism seep more into society. And these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different principles of collectivism that you absolutely need to know as a student here in Social 30, okay? So the first one is economic equality. When we talk about economic equality, ladies and gentlemen, what we're talking about is the idea of making everyone the same economically, getting rid of that gap between the rich and the poor, because in some countries there is a massive gap between the rich and the poor. Give me a sec here. All right, so anyways, yeah, there's this massive gap between the rich and the poor. Now, the next is cooperation, and we usually juxtapose cooperation with this idea of, self-interest and working for you and you only. Public property, we juxtapose that with private property, and when we look at individualism, we will talk about that. Collective interest instead of, again, the idea of self-interest. Collective responsibility instead of being responsible for you and you only, and then something called adherence to collective norms. And a norm is just simply behavior that is expected as a member of a group. So the first principle of collectivism that we need to talk about is economic equality. Okay, so let's talk about this, guys. So economic equality, as I was mentioning before, refers to the fact that the economic disparity is lessened or eliminated. So this term, economic disparity, very important here in Social 30. So we're going to underline that. Okay, economic disparity. So economic disparity, guys, as it mentions, is the gap between the rich and the poor. Okay, and we know, folks, that there are some people on the planet that make, billions and billions of dollars, and we know that there's some people who are also incredibly poor. Well, in a society that is collectivist, they pursue ways to try to lessen that economic inequality or that disparity between them. Economic disparity and economic inequality are referring to the same thing. Now, We'll talk about how we do this in a second. So it says socialist states that are left of center, right? We should know where we find the socialist states of the world, economically speaking, right? So nations like Sweden, like Norway, like Denmark, they're quite soft when it comes to trying to eliminate economic disparity or that economic inequality that we see in society, right? So they use soft means like taxes. And guess what? Here in Canada, that's what we do too, right? We use taxation where we take from the rich, we give to the poor, kind of like Robin Hood, and with that, guys, we redistribute the wealth, okay? And that's a big fancy term that you're going to want to know here in Social 30, right? If you're asked or you write about, taxation as a means to eliminate economic inequality, that's great, right? But if you mention redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor as a means to eliminate economic disparity or inequality, that makes you sound more intelligent. And when you sound smart, you generally get a better mark, right? So socialist states are more soft when it comes to the elimination of economic disparity or inequality, whereas communist states, right? Communist states, of course, are found on the far left, will use force to create equality. And what we're talking about here, guys, in communist states is literally like property confiscation. And I apologize about my writing on this tablet thing that I have. Look, here it is. Look, see. It's very awkward to be writing on a different surface than where it comes up. But that says property confiscation. I'm very sorry about how terrible that is. So yeah, we see property confiscation. And guys, for example, in the Soviet Union, which you'll learn about, in the Soviet Union, under Stalin's 5-year plans, what we saw here, folks, was literally the forced revocation of property that people legally owned, right? And once the Bolsheviks came to power, that property was confiscated for the so-called greater good of the state, right? And it was transferred to all those who didn't have it in order to try to create the semblance of balance in economic standing. So great quote from Karl Marx here, right? It says, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, right? That is very much a collectivist or socialist way of thinking about wealth. So if you have more, you give more, and if you need more, you get more. That's what that quote is saying. Okay, now guys, it says to facilitate the creation of economic equality, the state provides social services, collectively known as welfare, to help the economically disadvantaged. So in collectivist societies, ladies and gentlemen, we have social services like I'm trying to think, like in Quebec, here in Canada, we have universal childcare, which helps the economically disadvantaged, and to be honest too, even people who aren't economically disadvantaged. We have welfare programs. We have things like subsidized housing, right? We have all these programs to try to lift up the poor to make life better for them. Okay, so social services are the way in which we provide or try to create this semblance of economic equality in a collectivist society. And guys, again, how do we do this? Through taxes. Every single thing the government gives us, they give it to us, or they give it to us because we pay taxes, okay? Period. There's no other way for government to give things to us. The only way government gives to us is to take from someone and to give it to someone else. The government doesn't produce a product or a service that has value, right? They simply redistribute that money around and try to create a society of equality. All right, let me just erase this here. Boom, there we go. Okay, so guys, look, as a teacher who's been doing this for a while, students understanding of economic equality is always flawed, and I don't want you to have those same flaws when it comes to what is going on here. So it says, commonly students think that economic equality means that everyone has the same amount of money. And guys, that's just not true. Too many students think that it means getting paid the same, okay? And it's not, okay? Economic equality, it's not, I can't draw. Let me try this here. So it's not being paid the same. Okay, it is not being paid the same. Too many people think that economic equality means that whether you're a doctor or a person working in a restaurant or a simple laborer in a factory, that you all get paid the same. And that is a very simplistic understanding of what economic equality actually means. In truth, guys, economic equality means equality of condition, right? It is equality of condition. It means the conditions in which humans exist in that society is basically the same, right? And guys, that means the house that people all live in is more or less the same. The material goods that individuals have, right? Couches, kitchen tables, knives, pots, pans, all that stuff is the same. It would mean that the car people drive is basically the same. You know what I mean? No Ferraris versus Ford Fiestas, none of that kind of stuff. So yeah, guys, economic equality means equality of condition. And that's what people on the left who believe in collectivism are trying to achieve. They want to create economic equality. So no one has an exorbitant or a massive amount of wealth or is desperately poor. And again, as I mentioned, this is all done through redistribution of wealth. The next principle of collectivism that we need to know, is cooperation, ladies and gentlemen, cooperation. So look, this is something that, if you are a student in Western society, cooperation is something that we have been taught since being a little kid, right? It's something that, has been ingrained in us. We work together, we're not ball hogs when it comes to, phys ed when you're a little kid. When you get older, everyone's expected to chip in inside your house. We all cooperate every weekend. We go through my house, right? My daughters and my wife and I, we clean all together, right? And try to make our house look semi-presentable, although with a 7 and a 9-year-old, that tends to be rather difficult. But anyways, it's everyone's job to chip in. That's what cooperation is all about. So cooperation is the means through which members of a group or collective achieve their common goals. And guys, look, cooperation is kind of a neat idea because it focuses on one particular idea. And I'm going to write that idea up here. So it's the idea that many, that's a Y. There we go. Many hands make light work. That's an E. So many hands make light work. And again, I'm apologizing. I'll do it a million times for my terrible penmanship with this silly tablet pen that I have. So many hands make light work. And guys, when we cooperate, it makes things more efficient. It makes things easier. So yeah, you've been indoctrinated your entire life to believe in cooperation. And when I say indoctrinated, I'm not saying it's bad, right? It's not bad to cooperate. Cooperation is important. We have to all get along, right? And it says, guys, cooperation, yeah, there we go, follows the premise that many hands make light work. And if you were going through the PowerPoint, you clicked on this video, it showed you a clip from Sesame Street, right? It showed you a clip from Sesame Street where Big Bird was singing to you about the importance of cooperation. So yes, as a young person, right, you were taught collectivist values because, guys, I mean, the group matters, right? The collective matters. Society is a collective, and we all have to try to get along and cooperate to have the sort of society that we wanted. If we're all radical individualists and simply followed what I and only I want, society, I would argue, would fall apart very, very quickly. So in American society, we have the Amish, right? The Amish live together, they raise kids together, they do everything together. And there's a really cool video of an Amish barn raising to show you how efficiently cooperation works, in fact. And guys, it is not uncommon for the Amish to get up in the morning and literally raise a barn by the end of the day. Something that would take, weeks and weeks and weeks for, a few people to do is accomplished super quickly by a group of Amish individuals. Here in Canada, right, we have Hutterite people who are an example of a collective that cooperates. Again, they raise children together, they farm together, they live together. It's all done very much under the idea of cooperation. Here we have an example from North Korea, where to boost the economy, and please, guys, these videos make what we're talking about real. In North Korea, they had something called the 70-day battle, where it was expected that every single person cooperate for the greater good of the North Korean economy. So to boost the economy, it was expected that every single person who worked stayed at the factory for 70 straight days. 70 straight days. Wrap your brain around that for a second. And then, guys, we have an example of in China, there was a train station that needed to be built, and 1,500, I believe it was, maybe it was, I don't know, it was a lot, like 5,000 workers, a bunch of workers went there, and they built a train station in a day, in like 9 hours. So in like a 9-hour shift, boom, where there wasn't a train station, there was later. And that just goes to show you how when people work together, things are achieved much more efficiently. And that's what cooperation is all about. Okay. All right. So on this slide now, folks, you see a picture of Big Bird with the star of socialism / communism on his head, and then a picture of Che Guevara. It's a joke, right? It's a joke. I always joke with my students that, Big Bird, look at him. Now you can look at him differently because, in fact, Big Bird was a leftist socialist / communist. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? But yeah, he taught us collectivist values. I found this image online of Big Bird, right? Okay, the next principle of collectivism is public property. And when we talk about public property, ladies and gentlemen, we juxtapose it with the idea of private property. So we juxtapose it versus private property. Let me just write that. That says private property. Okay, so we juxtapose it with private property. And private property is something that we see in individualist societies. But in a collectivist society, property is public. Now, what is public property, Mr. Crosby? So public property, guys, is anything. Land, buildings, vehicles, not privately owned by individuals. So really, guys, what it comes down to is the idea of the means of production. When we have public property, the means of production, land, labor, capital, to use a Marxian idea, is owned by everybody, not by somebody. It's owned by the many, not by one. So we juxtapose it with private property in individual societies. And as it says, and we sort of talked about this already, public property is funded by and maintained by public money or taxes, right? It's the same thing. Public money is tax dollars and can be used by all members of society. No one has specific claim on that property. So guys, an example of public property would be, we have a couple examples here on our screen, right? This image here is downtown Edmonton, which of course is just outside of Sherwood Park here. That is City Hall, right? City Hall is funded and maintained, and it was built with public tax dollars. Right here is an image of the legislature here in Edmonton, in downtown Edmonton. Right, this is where the provincial government of Alberta is headquartered. That is public property. It is funded and maintained by tax dollars. Here we have an image of Strathcona County Transit buses. These buses are bought, maintained, and even driven by individuals who get that salary based on public tax dollars. Here we have a picture of Horlack Park in central Edmonton, right? That public park is a park that all people can use, and that public park is an example of public property. Millennium Place, the Millwoods Wave Pool in Edmonton, the Twilliger Rec Center, Festival Place, the park down the street from my house where there's a big sign that says Strathcona County on it, right? Guys, these are all examples of public property. And the way I want you to think about public property, guys, is because no one specifically owns it, no one receives value from it. Property has value, but if we all own it equally, then no one gains any sort of economic advantage from it. And I would write that down, okay, guys? Nobody gains any economic advantage from private property, and that helps us create that economic equality in society that we talked about before, where you can own more than someone else. In the case of a society that has private property, well then as you gain something with more value, then you can continue to sell it and buy more and buy more and buy more, and eventually, you know, you're the Jeff Bezos of the world, where you have a net value or net worth of $180 billion or whatever he has, right? Now, one big issue, guys, with public property is a diminished sense of social responsibility. One big flaw of public property is people tend to not really care about it. So I'll give you an example. Where I used to work at Archbishop Jordan, we used to have these microwaves upstairs pre-COVID up in the common area, and also couches. And, you know, it was not uncommon for a student to come to school and put their lunch in the microwave, you know, hot chili for lunch, and they keep that lid on too tight. As the chili heats up, the water starts to boil in that chili, because obviously there's liquid in there, and it pops the lid off eventually, right, as it creates steam, and boom, chili everywhere in the microwave. And the reaction of students is basically, you open it up, you see that your lunch has exploded, you pull it out, and you close it. Why don't you clean it up? Because it's not yours, so you don't care. There used to be couches upstairs at ABJ as well. Those were couches provided by the school. The school provided that through public tax dollars. Those couches got destroyed. You know, kids were sitting there eating their lunch, finishing their sandwich, and once they were done eating, they would like stuff it down in between the couch cushions, and eventually those couches became so disgusting that they got rid of them. You ever visited a public toilet like down on White Ave here in Edmonton? No thank you, right? No thank you. So one big issue, guys, with public property is this lack of caring about it. When it's not yours, you don't care about it. When someone gives you something, like in the form of public property, right, there's just a total lack of real like understanding of the value of it. On this slide, ladies and gentlemen, we have, look, if you want to be a good social studies student, you need to understand case studies. You need to understand pros and cons of, you know, one ideology or another. So I thought I would share with you the case study of Venezuela. And guys, in Venezuela, beginning in 1998, under a man by the name of Hugo Chavez outlawed all private property. Now, look, I'm not saying that, you know, one ideology is specifically better than another, because here's the reality, ladies and gentlemen. The reality of each ideology is they have their pros and their cons, right? There's good and bad in each ideology, and usually the correct answer is we need a balance of, you know, both things in order to have things work. Because if you sort of take the good of let's say, individualism and you take the good of collectivism, then you get a better society. So anyways, let's talk about Venezuela a little bit. So Venezuela, guys, was once the wealthiest nation in Latin America. And I don't know what you know about Venezuela today, but in Venezuela, literally, they're like rioting against their government right now because the people in Venezuela are so desperate and so poor that they can't provide themselves with the necessities of life. Food, clothing, medicine, all those things just don't exist in Latin America. And the question is, guys, how did we get there? Because Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves in the world, known, right? There might be other countries that have more that haven't discovered it yet, but guys, like Venezuela should be an incredibly wealthy nation. So in the 1970s, guys, Venezuela had a GDP, or a gross domestic product, similar to that of Great Britain. When we talk about GDP and social 30, folks, we're talking about like the total amount of economic output seen in a nation. Nations with high GDPs generally can provide very, very well for their citizens. So like Canada has a great GDP. The United States, Great Britain, I believe like the highest in the world is like Qatar or Luxembourg, right? When you live in a society with a high GDP, they can provide a lot of stuff for their people and the people live well. So in the 1970s, Venezuela was similar, economically speaking, to Great Britain, right? Sure, there's economic inequality, just like we see here in Canada or Britain or the United States, but like overall, people lived quite well. And then, as I mentioned, in 1998, this man by the name of Hugo Chavez came to power, and Chavez promised to end economic inequality in that country. So the people were seduced by the idea of the elimination of economic disparity and the creation of economic equality for all people, which is a very leftist, collectivist, socialist idea. So what did Chavez do? How did he turn the nation of Venezuela into basically what it is today, right? Where we're seeing people rioting against the government because of the lack of necessities. Well, one of the first things that Chavez did, folks, is he nationalized the Venezuelan economy. And when we talk about nationalization, guys, nationalization is a leftist idea. Remember that chart we did a few days ago, right? Or maybe it's been a week ago now for you. Remember that chart where we had like communism, socialism, capitalism, and then fascism? Nationalization, I'm pretty sure we had it on there. If we didn't, you should add it. Nationalization is a leftist socialist idea. Nationalization is when government runs or takes over business, right? So instead of it being owned by a private individual, now it's owned by government, which technically government represents all people, right? So what happened, guys, is Chavez, he nationalized electricity, energy, healthcare, and basically every other business. So private business almost didn't exist. Now, why is that problematic? It's problematic, guys, because again, when someone isn't working for themselves, they tend not to work hard. And eventually, guys, private ownership in Venezuela disappeared. Now, combine that with the fact, guys, that from 1999 to 2012, oil was booming in the world, right? And Alberta's a case study of that. Oil was doing really, really well from 1999 to 2012. And Venezuelans lived these amazing lives, as did Albertans, as did most Canadians, because of the amount of oil that was going through our economy, being sold to other people, right? We're benefiting from it. There's jobs, all these things. Yay. Everyone's happy. So eventually, guys, oil peaks at over $100 a barrel. And things were booming in Venezuela. However, guys, as we should know, hopefully know, if you live in a petro state like Alberta, like Venezuela, then you know that as the value of oil goes down, then the amount of revenue that a government also goes down as well. And now we're sitting at, oil being here in Alberta, I think it's called like Western Canadian Select. It's somewhere in the $30 to $40 range. And that hurts, right? That hurts. The problem with what they did in Venezuela is with the nationalized economy where they basically banned all private property. Well, now that oil isn't there, then there's no economy worth speaking of, right? Everyone has become dependent upon the government. And when the government was pulling in massive amounts of oil wealth during the boom times of oil, they could just dole out social services and money to help people, and it was no big deal. But when you run off private business and then the lifeblood of the economy starts to run dry, such as in the case of Venezuela or Alberta, oil, then what's left, right? What's left? So now, guys, the situation in Venezuela where oil is dropping and all industry is more or less gone, the economy's in economic ruin, and it's very sad, which is why I say you need this healthy balance of both privately owned business and also publicly run business as well. So with private business being run away, the capacity to manufacture goods, because the government did it all for people, it's gone, right? So the state doesn't produce its own food. They don't have like an auto industry. They don't have, a real strong tech sector. None of that exists, right? All food used to be imported to Venezuela for the most part, and now it's all gone. So I highly encourage you to watch this video on the slide, because it really shows you how there needs to be this balance between, the idea of private ownership and also public ownership. You shouldn't have totally one or the other, because it leads to problems. Sorry, before we talk about collective interest, let me just define what those problems are. So I said you shouldn't have totally private ownership or totally public ownership. Now, why is that? Let me just talk about this for a sec. Where you have, again, guys, totally public ownership, you get Venezuela, where the people become so dependent upon the government that if government can't provide for the people don't know what to do. They have no sense of initiative, right? Because it's been sucked out of them because of that suckling of the government teat forever. And alternatively, guys, if you have a society based totally upon private ownership, eventually what happens is you start to see the accrual of wealth in the hands of the relative few. Those who are really successful gain more and more and more and more. And then you start to see that economic gap between the rich and the poor get larger and larger and larger. And America is a prime example of that. After this PowerPoint, guys, I'll show you an example of how bad economic inequality, in fact, is in the United States of America, right? Underneath this module, I will link a YouTube video that demonstrates how terrible economic inequality actually is in the United States of America. Just for sake of knowledge, in the United States, 15% of their population is considered poor. And that's kind of crazy when you also consider that the United States is the richest country that has ever existed in the history of the world. Right? Like, wrap your brain around that for a sec. So you have some people, the Warren Buffetts, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Elon Musks, the Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates, who are billionaires, and they could spend $1 million a day for the rest of their life and they would never run out of money. Meanwhile, you also have people who live in boxes underneath bridges, right? So anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about collective interest. So collective interest refers to the set of important ideals that members of a group have in common. Guys, a great example of collective interests would be like sports teams, right? Sports teams are collectives, and what is the interest of every sports team? Are you like, yeah, we want to lose every game? No, right? Guys, when it comes to collective interest of a sports team, the collective interest of that team is to win. Now, guys, another example that we have seen in the North Korea documentary would be the example of how in the garment factories of North Korea, you saw how the people of North Korea were singing the praise to their dear leader, right? In the case of the documentary, that would be Kim Jong-un, right? Today in North Korea, it's Kim Il-sung, right? I'm confused by the North Korean leaders. there's Kim Il-sung first, Kim Jong-il was in the documentary, and then today North Korea is run by Kim Jong-un. So we have 3 generations of the same family in that nation who have led their people. So within collective states, guys, collective interests are dictated by the state, and people are expected to follow. So, you know, in states like Venezuela, right, you don't speak ill of the leader. It's just not what you do, right? Another example, guys, of collective interests, or a group of people with collective interests, would be labor unions, right? Labor unions have the interests of, you know, trying to ensure that the working conditions for the people in that union are better. They fight for better pay. Here in Alberta, there's a nurses union. What do they want? They want more money put into healthcare so that they can provide top-notch care for their patients. Again, we talked about the idea of sports teams. Yeah, so all groups have interests. Political parties, right? To be a member of a political party, that is a collective that have certain interests, right? More leftist parties are about providing for the people. They believe in more socialist means to create equality. More rightist political parties, such as the Republicans in the United States or conservative parties here in Canada, believe in, you know, more free market ideals, right? And these common interests or ideals unite this group of people together. It's basically, guys, like a common set of beliefs and what they're trying to achieve. That's what collective interest is all about. All right, we're almost at the end. I know this has been long, I'm sorry, but this is usually a pretty long discussion with my students when we go through it in class. So the next principle of collectivism is adherence to collective norms. Now, guys, what's a norm, right? A norm, it can be a person, right? A Norman. But guys, when we're talking about collective norms, we're talking about behaviors that are expected of people, right? And all societies, all collectives have norms of behavior. So as a teacher here in Alberta, I am a member of the Alberta Teachers Association, and one of the norms that I have to abide by is the fact that, you know, even if I'm upset with a kid, I can't go along and see that kid when he's like, hey, Mr. Crosby, how's it going? And I can't, boom, clothesline that kid, right? That would be considered a breaking of the norms that are associated with being in that group. Another example, guys, of a collective norm would be like, you know, in an elevator, how everyone just sort of looks forward and doesn't really make small chit chat or anything like that, right? You know, another norm in society would be you don't sit there and pick your nose, right? We all know that everyone does it, right? But it's something that, you know, in public, we just don't generally do. It's frowned upon, right? Belching and passing gas in public is something else that, at least in our society, in Canadian society, is considered to not be of norms. Now, guys, that norm might be different, right, in other societies. I know that in other cultures, it is considered fine to belch after a meal, and it's considered rude to not do it, right? You are expressing gratitude in some cultures when you belch. So, guys, an example of a collective norm in North Korea would be after the dear leader gives a speech, the job of the North Korean people is to clap and 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 clap. And it's been said that the first person who stops clapping, who decides that clapping time is over, well, then that person disappears, right? Back in the days of Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union, and we will learn about him. We'll see some videos about him once we get to our unit on the Soviet Union and communism. Guys, in Stalin's USSR, it was the same thing. When Stalin gave a speech, the people would clap and clap and clap and clap. Like literally, they would like give him a standing ovation for like 10 or 15 minutes. It was actually kind of crazy, right? And it was just a collective norm that was expected of everyone. When the dear leader clapped, you applauded him. That's just what you did. So yeah, guys, and in societies that are far left, we see that when you break collective norms, when you transgress what is expected of you in society, those individuals are generally sent to re-education camps, or they're punished or banished, right? In the case of, let's say, the Amish, right? I don't know if you guys have ever watched on TLC, the learning channel. There's not a lot of learning going on there, but on TLC, you know, there's that show Breaking Amish. When people don't adhere to the collective norms of Amish society, they get banished. They're told to leave. You know, if you're a member of a sports team or a political party, right, if you do something that's not in line with what the party wants, you are banished or you are told to leave. Another example, guys, of the collective norms would be like here in Canada, right, or in the United States, we generally have something known as the Golden Rule, right? And the Golden Rule says that you treat others how you want to be treated, right? When you extend kindness, you get kindness back. That's the Golden Rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. And that, guys, is a collective norm. You know, you don't go around flipping people off. You don't go around swearing at people. You don't go around yelling at people, because do you want to be yelled at? Do you want to be flipped off? Do you want to be sworn at? Of course you don't, right? So, guys, that's considered to be a norm here in our society. All right, holy cow, look at us go. So second last slide. I apologize. I know this was long. I didn't mean it to be long, but here we are. I tend to talk a lot. I like to give you guys examples because I think these examples are important to make sure that you get what's going on. Okay, second last slide here, collective responsibility. Guys, look, collective responsibility is the idea that everyone is responsible for the actions of everybody else, right? So give you an example of a sports team. I used to be an athlete and I used to play soccer, and when I played soccer, it was the responsibility of everyone to show up on time for practice, because we're a team. That's just what we do, right? When you show up late, you're disrespecting the entire collective or group. And guys, my old coach, his name was Henry. If people showed up late to practice, he made us all run lines, right? He made us all run lines. I've heard of puke practices for hockey players, right? And, you know, to get that point across that, you know, everyone must toe the line. Everyone is responsible for the greater good of the team. You know, they will use punishment. In North Korea, they use something called generational punishment. In North Korea, they believe that evil or transgressions are genetic, right? So what they do, guys, is if, let's say, you are a person in North Korea who defects or leaves North Korea, not only will your immediate family be punished, but also your parents and also the grandparents of those individuals. So this is generational punishment. And guys, that is, you know, collective responsibility exemplified in most societies that are more individualist, right? If you break the law, if you transgress what the government says is allowed, I mean, it's you who gets punished for it, right? If I do something wrong here in Canada, I go to jail, right? It's not my wife, my kids, and my parent who gets punished for it, right? It's me and me only. So collective responsibility, as it mentions, ensures that nobody questions or does anything that is against the state. Because if you do, you know that a large circle of your family will be punished for it. And I'll give you guys an example of collective responsibility from when I was a kid. This is a great example. So I used to go to a school in Edmonton called Minchow. And at this school, we had a janitor by the name of Mr. Gomez, probably rest in peace, because that was like 35 years ago. And at this school, Mr. Gomez, he was a genius. He really was a genius. He decided that, you know, kids are gross. Kids make a mess. And to be the lone caretaker at the school, it was no fun for him, right? Because he would have to go through classrooms and clean up the mess. Well, what Mr. Gomez did is he created something known as the Golden Garbage Can Award. And what he said, he made an announcement at the beginning of the week, and he said, you know, each class, or whichever class is the cleanest consistently all week, on Friday afternoon, I will give you a garbage can that he spray painted gold, and I will fill it with popcorn. And I don't know if you know this or not, but popcorn is really, really cheap. If you buy a bag of popcorn and pop it, it's like a couple dollars, right? But it saved him hours and hours of cleaning. Now, being a kid motivated by food as were many of my friends, we decided that we wanted that popcorn. Our teachers would give us a popcorn party, you know, the last hour of the day kind of deal. And every Friday we were so excited to hear which class won the Golden Garbage Can Award. And I'll tell you what, man, when it came to kids like making a mess in class, if I saw a kid drop something on the ground and not pick it up, you were like, hey, pick it up. You know what I mean? That was collective responsibility. We're holding everyone to account. And, you know, a few times we won the Golden Garbage Can Award and we got to eat that delicious buttery popcorn on Friday afternoon. You know what I mean? Nothing better than elementary. Good old elementary school. All right, so the last slide for looking at principles of collectivism is, guys, look, one thing I want you to understand is that here in North America, our indigenous people have been here for, I mean, fossil records suggest 30 to 40,000 years. So before Europeans showed up and started to colonize this side of the world, land ownership was not really heard of. And guys, like most indigenous societies that I'm aware of have always or had always, you know, raised children together, hunted together, lived together. And the reason for that, guys, is because to live and work and hunt in a collective, in a group, just made sense. It ensured survival, right? To do it on your own back before the days of Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats and, you know, food delivery services was very, very difficult, right? If you couldn't hunt and find an animal, you died. However, if you're in a group of people and you hunted and found or killed many animals, I mean, then that meat would be shared amongst everybody. So decision making, education, child rearing, it was all done collectively. And guys, one thing I want you to understand here in Social 30 is that there's this inherent tension between, you know, European individualist ideals that exist in society and then Indigenous collectivist ideals that we see in society. And many times here in Canadian history, we have seen sort of facing off about the different sort of, I guess, motivations of European versus Indigenous society, right? And we'll look at that more when we get to looking at illiberal responses of liberal governments in this course. And we'll look at like the Oka crisis, residential schools, Idle No More, and all these sort of resistance movements that we've seen on the part of Indigenous societies here in Canada. Okay, so guys, that's it. Hopefully this was okay for you. Hopefully this stuff makes sense now. If not, right, I'm always at your disposal. Fire me off an email from my students. Yeah, peace, love you guys, and we'll see you in the next video.